Welcome into the Skol Purple Podcast, everybody. Hopefully you all enjoyed your bye week. Carson with the Skol Purple Podcast here, as you probably guessed. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about a couple of trade possibilities for the Vikings here as the trade deadline approaches next week. Let's talk about it. And I am focused on the slot cornerback position because if you missed our defensive breakdown of the Vikings defense through the first 6 games, Chandon Sullivan has not been good. He is ranking towards the bottom half of the league in coverage grade and overall as a defensive overall defensive grade as a corner. So I am posing that the Vikings bring in a corner or maybe two, preferably just one, but maybe two is needed. It'll be interesting to see if the Vikings even make any moves, which I'll get into here momentarily. But the first one that I want to talk about today, Desmond King. And I know what you're thinking. There goes Carson again, talking about his Iowa boys. As an Iowa Hawkeye fan, he's got to bring up an Iowa player of some sort every time. But let's talk a little bit about Desmond King, former Hawkeye. I think he would be a great fit for the Vikings, and here is why. He's played almost all of his snaps in the slot where the Vikings need desperate help. Chandon Sullivan, as I mentioned last week, has been graded as one of the worst overall corners, and going into last week, he was 90th out of 108 and 98th out of 108 in coverage this season, whereas King has been really good with a coverage grade of 77.9 with 250 of his 286 snaps coming in the slot as well. And my thought process is he is a short-term guy contract-wise. He's under contract for a year. He does have a potential out after next year. He's got a $3 million base salary for next year. $1 million, just over $1 million currently on his contract for this year. So it's a very small contract, and I think the Vikings could very easily bring him in, and I don't think he's going to cost them much because, like I said, it was a one-year deal. His grade has gone down to 76.5 defensively and now has a coverage grade of 72.2, but still putting him in the top echelon of slot corners in the league. And like I said, with Chandon Sullivan's numbers struggling, I don't think there's any reason why you shouldn't look to upgrade that spot, because I do believe slot cornerback, along with the coverage of our linebackers, who are bottom, both of them, Jordan Hicks, Eric Kendricks, bottom 5 in coverage according to PFF. I believe both of those guys could be helped if we have a better slot corner as well. And maybe we see a little bit better improvement on the defensive side if we can go ahead and get Desmond King. Or what about Bryce Callahan? Let's talk a little bit about Bryce Callahan now, a non-Iowa guy, so you know there's no bias now. He has been a solid player for the Chargers. Now, the Chargers could still be considered to be in the mix there in the AFC. I get that. But he's another guy that's on a one-year deal. He's in his 30s. He's 31 years old, Bryce Callahan. Last year, he had a really bad PFF grade, one of his worst years in the NFL, but he has been improving again this year, and 264 of his 302 snaps have been in the slot, and he is in that top 10 again of slot corners so far in 2022. Overall grade defensively 70.2 and a coverage grade of 74.3. So Bryce Callahan, like I said, would be another good option, again, to fill in for Chandon Sullivan, who has not been good for the Vikings. And I think the Vikings could do really well by upgrading that spot. And, you know, you could also throw in wide receiver. You could throw in a tight end. You could throw in maybe some more depth on the defensive line, or, you know, probably not the most likely, but like another linebacker. I don't think that's going to happen unless you're talking about an edge rusher. But I do think it is interesting to keep an eye on the trade market for the Vikings going into the trade deadline. And, you know, I was talking with Tony, and I don't know if the Vikings are even going to do a trade or make a trade before the trade deadline. I would be I would not be surprised if they just stand pat at the trade deadline and don't make any trades. But I do think Bryce Callahan and Desmond King could be very, very buy low, high reward options for the Vikings here in the trade market. The Texans are out of it. Like, they're going nowhere. What use is Desmond King on that team? There's no guarantee he would go back to there with the option next year anyway. So why don't they trade him for, a fourth, fifth, whatever they could get out of him? And I think that would be a great deal for the Vikings if they can get a really good deal on that. Or Bryce Callahan, who's got even about the half of the contract of Desmond King, and he doesn't have an option even for next year. So I think those are two possibilities for the Vikings at corner. I'm looking forward to seeing what they'll do. But like I said, I'm not getting my hopes up. I always get my hopes up for the Twins at the trade deadline. I ain't doing it for the Vikings. But hopefully the Vikings can get back to their winning ways this week against the Cardinals. Make sure to like, subscribe, and if you wouldn't mind sending us a little something on Venmo, it's at Skol Purple Pod on Venmo. And as always, Skol.